Story number 1. In 2016, the 18th of September was a Sunday, and I will remember that day until I die. I was living with my boyfriend, now husband, in a place called Olivella near Barcelona. We had a small rented house on a cul-de-sac called Gabars, without number, just down the street. The living room had a window that looked directly out onto the street. I remember getting a text message from my husband in the afternoon saying, "Barcelona beat Madrid. I'll go out tonight." Honestly, I was pretty excited to have the night to myself. I opened a bottle of wine, made myself comfortable in my pajamas on the couch, and set out to watch Jurassic World for a bit of nostalgia, as I loved the originals as a child. I must have been no more than half an hour into the movie when I literally heard the screech of tires outside. Then looking out the window, I saw a car speeding toward the end of the street. I heard the screech of tires again when it stopped, and I immediately thought, what the hell is going on here? Then I saw the driver get out and run to our door. I could tell it was a woman by her long hair and figure, but I didn't recognize the person running in our path. Seconds later, I heard knocking on the door, and I wasn't going to open it for a complete stranger, so I looked outside again to see if I recognized the car that had stopped right there. It turns out that I did recognize him after a second inspection, and that's when I realized that the person at the door was my friend Isabel. I hurriedly opened it and literally gasped when I saw her, because her face was a complete mess. She had blood all over her mouth and chin, where it had been coming out of her nose and lips. Her cheek was swollen, and she had a large bruise on her forehead, where it looked like someone had hit her. As soon as I opened the door, Isabel rushed in with an expression of utter terror and said to me, "He's coming. Call the police now." We've been close friends since our 20s, which means Isabel had been to our house many times before. As he shouted, "Who's coming? What the hell is going on?" She hurriedly closed the door behind her before grabbing the keys to the sideboard to lock it. I ran into the living room to grab my phone and do what she asked, call the police, but the whole time I kept yelling, "Who's coming, Isabel? Talk to me." She had run to the kitchen after closing the door, and when she reappeared after I yelled at her, she had the biggest knife we had in our hand. I didn't have time to react to that, realizing how serious the situation was, because I had to start talking to the operator to explain what was going on. At that point, Isabel literally had to tell me what was going on so I could relay it to the 911 operator, but instead she asked for my phone and started telling her herself. He didn't say everything I'm about to write, but this is basically the background for you to understand the context. Basically, Isabel had been seeing a guy for the past few months, a weightlifter she'd met at the gym. She had mentioned it to me once or twice, and she would be the first to admit it, Isabel had a lot of different men in her life at the time, and that's okay because she was young, free, single, and exploring. He made sure to tell every man he saw at the time that they wouldn't be exclusive, and apparently everyone accepted it. She didn't prolong the agony if she thought things weren't going to work out. She wasn't in it for free dinners or anything like that. She was looking to meet her future husband, which she finally did. Once he realized that a guy wasn't the one, he would sit with him somewhere nice and give him the classic, "It's not you, it's me" talk. She was always very sensitive and considerate about it, and I believe her because that's the kind of person she was, at least outside of her love life. According to her, no one had ever had a problem with that before. They knew what they were getting into, and usually most accepted the situation as best they could. But this guy, the weightlifter he'd met at the gym, a certain Felix, didn't take his rejection so well. She had never told him where he lived, so she was horrified to find him outside her apartment one day. He wasn't aggressive about it, but basically demanded a second chance with her, and Isabel was so scared that Felix had found her that she told him she would call the police if she reappeared outside her apartment. Apparently, he told her it wasn't necessary and then showed up again a few days later, this time demanding a second chance in a less polite way, and she was late for work, because he basically wouldn't let her go until he told her he'd send her a message to go out for drinks on the weekend. He drove to work, had some sort of crisis in the break room, so his boss told him to clock out, go home, and take as much time as he needed to deal with the situation before returning to work. He drove back to Barcelona, called the police, and gave a statement in the afternoon. The two policewomen who visited her told her that they judged harassment cases using the FR system, or the system of four. Any behavior that was fixed, obsessive, unwanted, and repeated could be classified as harassment or stalking. And since Felix had twice appeared uninvited, having obviously stalked her for a while to find out where she lived, that definitely qualified as criminal harassment. The policewomen told Isabel that she and her colleague would contact Felix only to inform him that if he approached her again, he would be arrested and charged. Apparently, he told them that it was all a misunderstanding and that of course he would leave her alone if she wasn't interested. But that was a big lie. That same day, Felix waited until he knew Isabel would be home from work and then forced his way into her apartment after tricking her into letting him in and brutally beat her before she managed to escape. He told me that he only stopped beating her when she pretended to be dead, at which point she ran out of the apartment, jumped into her car, and drove straight to our house. He said the only reason he didn't call the police during the drive was because he was afraid of crashing. He had blood coming out of his mouth and nose, and he was shaking with adrenaline. It took all his composure to get there in one piece, but he did. And after slamming on our street and running our way to our door, that's where I came into the picture. When she took the phone from me, Isabel told the operator a very condensed version of what I just said, holding my phone in one hand and a kitchen knife in the other. As he spoke, he shoved past me into the living room so he could look out the large window facing the street. But as soon as he did, he also saw the lights of a car suddenly come on at the end of the street, and another car skidded to a stop at the end of our street. At the time, I wasn't 100% sure who was driving, but Isabel was. She ran past me again, shoving the phone in my hands as I walked up the stairs and disappeared from sight. I looked out the living room window to see a huge, balding, bodybuilder-looking guy walking steadily down our path to the front door. The next thing I heard was the knocking on the door for the second time that night, but this time they were louder and more terrifying. I was terrified, more terrified than I had ever been in my entire life, and I did the only thing I could think of, which was basically pretend. I still had the 911 operator on the phone when I started yelling things like, "What the hell are you doing banging on the door this time of night?" We had 2 frosted glass panels on the front door, and our security light was on outside, so we could see and hear each other through the door. After yelling at him, I only heard, "If you don't open this door, I will break it." I've never heard anyone sound so angry in my life. He sounded like an animal, like he was growling and foaming at the mouth. We had already told the police where we were, and the Barcelona police station is literally just a few miles away, so I started yelling at him that the police were on their way, that I had already called them, and to leave before he was arrested. I remember getting a little nervous after saying that, and I remember putting the phone to my ear and starting to say to the operator, "Did you hear that? He's trying to break down my door. Please make sure someone comes, I'm begging you." I had this horrible idea in my head that the police wouldn't be there in time. You hear all kinds of horrible stories about budget cuts and long response times. But the operator on the other end kept telling me, "Someone's on the way, honey, don't worry. They'll be there in a few minutes, okay?" And I started yelling all of that at Felix outside, and I guess on some level it actually got to him a little bit. He stopped banging on the door, and in a voice that sounded a little more composed, he simply said, "I know she's there." I feigned ignorance again and told him that I had no idea what he was talking about and that I was home alone, that no one was with me. In response, Felix went absolutely insane. He began to take great steps backwards and kick the door flying, and after 1 or 2, which must have weakened the frame sufficiently, the door opened wide enough that he could push it open with his shoulder and open it all the way. I raised the knife as he walked through the door and honestly thought that would keep him away, But to my utter horror, Felix didn't seem remotely intimidated. He took a few steps toward me as I shouted, "Get out, leave me alone." And then he lunged at me and pushed me to the ground so hard that I didn't stand a chance. But as he fell backwards, I managed to reach him with that big bread knife he was holding, and all the force he used to push me back to him as the blade of the knife cut through his skin as he fell and opened a large cut on his wrist and forearm. He screamed as I fell onto the carpet in our hallway, and I remember crawling backwards as he put a hand on the wound. Then, as the blood started gushing out of his fingers, I remember him looking at me and starting to scream, "I'm going to kill you." His eyes were completely unhinged at that moment, and by that, I mean he was absolutely beside himself. Honestly, I think if the police hadn't arrived when they did, they really would have killed me. But as I kicked and screamed, trying to keep him away, I just remember seeing those flashing lights outside on the street behind him. From our front door, there was a straight hallway to the kitchen, so I could see outside from where I was lying. As soon as I saw those lights, I started shouting, "Help! Help me! It's going to kill me!" at the top of my lungs, and it took Isabel only a second to realize that we were no longer alone. I remember how he turned around, still bleeding from his arm, and when he saw the police, he lunged at them. 5 police officers were there with pepper spray and batons to knock Felix down and put him in handcuffs, and he caused such a ruckus that almost everyone on our street came out to see him being put in the back of the police van. Isabel didn't come out of hiding until she saw the police. She had been hiding in our upstairs cupboard, still clutching the kitchen knife she had picked up when she first arrived. He ended up staying with us for a while after that, and the whole story with Felix didn't end there. It took months of court hearings and police visits before Isabel was finally able to get a restraining order, but even then, she didn't feel 100% safe living in that area. The whole legal thing was incredibly depressing as well. All the judges had to be 100% sure that Felix had been harassing her before finally putting pen to paper, and for a while it didn't look like she was going to get a restraining order at all. In the end, everything went well, but not at Olivella. We both live somewhere else now, at a distance. It's not as easy to see each other every week as we used to, but we're still very close. Isabel and I will always be very close. Not only because I rescued her, as she says, because I think she also rescued herself, to be honest. I just helped a little. I love her so much and would go through all that hell again if it meant keeping one of my friends safe from a monster like Felix. Story number 2. I came home after a night out with 2 friends at our usual bar. We arrived around 9 p.m. It wasn't too late, and after a couple of drinks, I walked back home since my girlfriend and I lived nearby. The lights were still on and so was the TV, so I turned everything off, took a quick shower, and then crawled into bed next to my girlfriend, who I thought was asleep. I usually look at my phone before bed, so I left the lamp on my bedside table. As I climbed into bed, my girlfriend suddenly turned around. I thought maybe I'd scared her a little by getting next to her, but suddenly she pulled one of her kitchen knives out from under her pillow and started trying to stab me. I fell out of bed with the phone still in my hand and ran out the door. I didn't bother to put on shoes and ran outside. I didn't have keys, so I couldn't lock the door, but my girlfriend didn't follow me. I stood in the middle of the street, making sure there was plenty of space around me, and dialed 911, which is the same number here in Argentina. I felt like my chest was soaked in warm water. There was a thread running down my forehead and a few splashes of blood along the way as well. I was quite surprised and didn't feel much pain until much later. 2 cars and an ambulance arrived and put me in the ambulance with an officer. The pain from my wound had started to increase, and I was given something for the pain, plus one of the paramedics applied pressure to my wound. I also vomited, probably from shock and blood, and I can't stand the blood at all. Meanwhile, 3 or 4 other officers rushed into our apartment. I found out later that my girlfriend was sitting up in bed, She hadn't said anything and was just crying, saying how sorry she was, but she was taken away pretty easily. Now I'm sitting in the emergency room. I just got stitches on my shoulder. It feels numb, but not too painful. I got my phone back about 3 hours ago, and since I have nothing else to do, I thought I'd write my own true story as a way to cope with this. I haven't slept at all, and it's almost noon as I write this, but at least I'll be able to go home today after I'm interviewed. I'm not sure if I'll be taken to the police station or interviewed here, and I'm completely exhausted right now, and it's hard to believe that the whole situation is real at times, like falling asleep and waking up again, but my nightmare is my reality. I still don't know for sure if he was really trying to kill me. It's incredibly hard for me to even accept it, but I can't imagine that he just wanted to hurt me. I feel lucky that he didn't stab me and only cut me. As for how close we were, he could have easily stabbed me in the heart or lungs. My biggest concern in all of this is the publicity that this kind of thing could generate. I live in a fairly small town, and news like this is very rare, and for your sake, I absolutely don't want it to be made public. I'm also worried about the mental repercussions this will have on me and her. Writing this is the only time I've ever had to fully process this event, and I'm writing it both for my own mental well-being and to share it with all of you, my friends. I'm completely lost about what to do. It hasn't been long since it happened, but I have absolutely no idea how I'm going to move on with my life, and I'm very worried about my girlfriend. I haven't been told anything about her since I got here, and I hope that once the cops interview me, they will help me clear things up. I feel incredibly lucky to be alive now. Things could have been very different. I don't think I've fully processed the fact that if I had cut myself a little deeper, I could be lying in a pool of blood in my own bed. Story number 3. Around the holidays last year, the guy I was dating came to my house and almost killed me. It all started when he saw an archive story on Instagram that I posted, and he was upset about it. We argued, and the argument turned violent toward me. I yelled at him to leave, but he wouldn't leave, and instead pushed me around the house and strangled me on 3, maybe 4 separate occasions. The last time he strangled me, I lost consciousness for about 20 or 30 seconds. I'm not 100% sure how long I was unconscious, but I was definitely out of it. 1 second he was standing, and the next he was on the ground. I also don't remember him taking a picture of me while I was unconscious, but he did, and then sent it to me as a way to make fun of me. Of course, I called the police, but I felt terrible about it. I only did it because my parents basically forced me to rat him out, and at the time I still loved my boyfriend, so I felt horrible for getting him in trouble. I wondered if he hated me or if he was mad at me. But when I heard he was arrested and released the same day, I was scared. I dreaded having to see him in court because of the protective order, and I couldn't bear the thought of seeing him and his family, who I once thought would be my in-laws. Currently, I have some nightmares and trouble sleeping, but I still don't really feel anything. I don't know what the future holds for us, but I just know that I don't want to go to court because I feel like that will make everything worse.